tell us that tonight's shiur is Le'ilui Nishmat Avi Morido Ber Meir Ben Reuven Halevi Imi Marati Rachel Bar Harav Michael. And tonight we begin book number 4 of 5 of the Torah. This week we will be reading parshat Bamidbar.
You're breaking up.
I'm breaking up. I know we're having some technical problems with the internet tonight. Hope it will clear up. It's not okay. Can you guys see my screen or not? No, not yet. There's nothing on my screen. Why is that? All right, so let's try again.
We have it.
Now we see it.
Okay, now you see it. Okay, now we see it. Now you see it. Now you don't. I don't know. This is one of these. It sounds like we're going to have a little bit of. Okay, let's do this. Okay, everybody can see the screen. Okay, so a Sefer Bamidbar. Firstly, the Hebrew name Bamidbar comes from the opening pasuk, Bamidbar Sinai, which you don't see on the screen right now. You see chapter 4, but the more appropriate name is clearly the Latin or English name of Numbers, which is captured in the Hebrew name of the book of Chumash HaPekudim, the book of the countings, because there are lots of numbers. There are lots of numbers. We have the counting of Bnei Yisrael at the beginning of the 40 years. At the end, toward the end of Bamidbar, we're going to have a new count of Bnei Yisrael at the end of the 40 years. And of course, some of the events that happened during those 40 years are chronicled in Sefer Bamidbar. There are also a few instances of mitzvot, but really Sefer Bamidbar, from a chronological perspective, and I've said this in the past also, really begins where Shemot left off. Vayikra has very little history, very little chronology, mostly mitzvot, and Bamidbar really begins with at the end of Sefer Shemot. We read about the establishment of the mishkan. Bamidbar picks up from there, and tonight we're going to talk about the travels of the mishkan, of how the mishkan is disassembled, or at least part of how it's disassembled and how it's transported when the Jews traveled in the desert. So chapter 4 of Bamidbar begins with that story. So we begin with firstly, Hashem begins by speaking not just to Moshe, but to Moshe and Aaron. We're going to go through the parshat. We're going to try to understand, why does Aaron get included in this commandment? Why is he part of the command? And we're told, if we look through it, it might seem relatively obvious to us, but Moshe is told, and Moshe and Aaron are told, Nasoet Rosh Bnei Kahat mitoch Bnei Levi. Literally lift up the heads of the sons of Kahat from the tribe of Levi, according to their families, according to their families and their fathers' houses. Now, here, no, not literally lift them up. Now, so here is use can be used in the sense of set them aside, because they are going to have a special count and a special job. Okay, they are to be set aside from the age of 30 to 50. Now, we know that the census that was taken at the beginning of Bamidbar was age 20 and up. The Levium, on the other hand, who are also counted in the chapter before this, are counted from the age of 1 month and upwards, not from the age of 20 and upwards. However, this count is only from the age of 30 to the age of 50. Why? All those that are coming into the service, who will be involved in the work of the mishkan. These Levium have a specific job in the mishkan, and that's what this parak is going to discuss. And it says, Kodesh HaKodashim. Now, it first begins by telling us that this is the job of the sons of Kahat in Ohel Moed concerning the mishkan, Kodesh HaKodashim, the most holy. Now, it's interesting because we know that Levi has 3 sons, Gershon, Kahat, and Merari. By right, we would have expected the first one to be counted to be Gershon. First one to be counted or set aside is going to be Kahat. We don't read about Gershon and Merari until next week's parsha, until parshat Naso. But the parshanim are going to tell us why Kahat gets chosen first. Although this pasuk seems to kind of be a spoiler, is Kodesh Kodashim. They're the ones who are going to be involved in the most holy things, and therefore they get counted first, or their job they get their job assignment first. Now it's interesting because the pasuk tells us that the work of Bnei Kohat is Kodesh Kodashim. We would have expected then to see a detail of what it is the Bnei Kohat are going to be involved with. It's not the way it works. The next pasuk immediately tells us when the camp is ready to travel, Aaron and his sons have to come first, and they're going to do a whole litany of things that are described. We're going to get to them in a minute and described in verses 5 all the way down till 15. So most of this parak, that even though it says, this is what Bnei Kohat are going to do, is dedicated to the sons of Aaron and what they have, the Kohanim, what they have to do in prep work for the transportation of all of these items. And then in verse 15, we're going to see that Aaron and his sons, the Kohanim, have to first prepare everything by covering it up, all of the items that are holy and all of the holy vessels when the camp is to travel. The acharechein, only after that, Yavo Bnei Kohat, let's say, will the Bnei Kohat be able to enter the space where the sanctuary was to pick up the things to carry them, below Yigual HaKodesh V'Metu, so that they should not approach the holy things and die. Elam Asa Bnei Kohat Ba'ol Moed. This is what the job of the carrying of the load that was the things that were carried by the sons of Kahat in Ohel Moed. So interestingly enough, we find that even though the parsha begins with Bnei Kahat, most of this chapter deals with what Aaron and his sons, the Kohanim, have to do to prepare for the sons of Kahat to come in and do their jobs. They're going to remember the mishkan is portable. It's built in pieces. So there are two aspects of the mishkan, or actually three aspects of the mishkan. There's furniture, there's walls, there's curtains. Those are the three pieces of the mishkan, and they're apportioned basically, roughly, to the three families of the Leviim. The furniture is going to be carried by Kahat, the sons of Kahat. The tapestries and hangings are going to be carried by the sons of Gershon, and the wood, the heavy beams, are going to be carried by Merari. Actually, they're not going to be carried; they're going to be transported in wagons. We're going to see in the parsha of Naso that there are going to be wagons that they're going to use to transport the beams, but they're the ones who are in charge of that. We're talking here about the sons of Kahat, and we're going to be dealing with the furniture, the items, the altar, the aron, the menorah, and we're going to see each of these has its own description, not how they're carried, but how they're prepared for the Bnei Kohat to carry them. Okay? And I'm going to quote one pasuk. Wait a minute, I think I have it at the bottom here, I hope. One pasuk from next week's parsha, when at the inauguration of the Mishkan, we are told that the Nesiim, the heads of the 12 tribes, donated 6 wagons and 12 oxen to pull those 6 wagons to be used in the transporting of the Mishkan. When those 6 wagons are apportioned, let's see, we have 3 Levitical families, 6 wagons, they should each get 2, right? Doesn't work that way, okay? The Bnei Gershon get 2, Bnei Merari get 4, and what does the pasuk tell us in verse 9 in chapter 7? L'ifnei Kohat lo natan. The sons of Kohat did not get any wagons and oxen. Ki avodat hakodesh aleihem bakotev isav, because they have the holy work; they are to carry it on their shoulders. Okay, and that, by the way, is throughout the accoutrements of the Mishkan. Even when we get to the Beit Hamikdash, they're never carried on a wagon; they're carried on shoulders. The only time the ark is put in a wagon, trouble happens. When David HaMelech is trying to bring the Aron to Yerushalayim, you read about it in Shmuel Bet, chapter Vav. Lots of problems happen with trying to get that when it's not being carried by shoulders, by people with their shoulders. Okay. let's go back for a minute because I really want to focus on the preparation because that's the whole chapter. The whole chapter focuses on the preparation of the mishkan. Now remember, we build the mishkan, we have three sections to the mishkan. There's the outer courtyard, which have hangings around it. There's the inner area, which is surrounded by boards, 20 on each side and 20 on each length, and 8 on the far side. And then the opening has basically a curtain in front of it. And outside that, in the courtyard, is the altar on which offerings are brought, the mizbach and the choshet. Inside, there are basically 4 pieces of furniture. There is, of course, the aron, which is in the inner side, in the Kodesh Kodashim, separated from the other part of the Kodesh by a parochet, a curtain. And then outside that, we have a shulchan, a menorah, and another mizbech, a smaller mizbech for bringing ketoret, for bringing incense. So those are the pieces that we're going to be dealing with here. We're not dealing with any of the walls. We're not dealing with the curtains that surround the periphery of the mishkan. That is other families of Levi's job. The cut is carrying the furniture. How do you carry menorah? We're going to find out. Great question. Lois says, how do you carry a menorah? We're going to find out how you carry a menorah. That is, if you've ever been to the Temple Institute menorah on top that overlooks the Kotel, you see it's not a small item. It's easily carried like your typical Hanukkah menorah that you just pick up in your hand. It's a rather large item. Okay, we're going to get to that in 1 minute. As I said, when the camp is about to travel, Aaron and his sons have the job of preparing all of this for the sons of God. So the first thing they do when they walk in is redo at parochet hamasach. They lower the parochet, they remove the parochet, that is the separation between the Kodesh and the Kodesh Kodashim, v'chisu bo et aron haidut, and they use it to cover the aron. Okay, that's the first thing they do is they take the parochet and they cover the aron with it. Because again, we're not supposed to be walking, they can't walk into the Kodesh Kodashim till there's no longer a Kodesh Kodashim and the aron has been covered. The natnu alav, after they've covered it, they put upon it a kasui or tachash, a tachash skinned covering, uparsu beged kalil techelet milmala, and on top of one of those things, there's a whole difference in the opinion of the parshanim, whether they take a huge tapestry. It's called a beged, but it's really a tapestry. It's really a curtain that is entirely made of techelet, blue dyed wool, and that is put above either the parochet or above the kisur tachash, depending on which of the parshanim you go with. But in either case, the aron is triple covered before anything happens. And then it says, v'samu badav, they shall place the carrying poles. Now, if you remember back in parshat,
can I ask a question?
I'm sorry. Yes, David, go ahead.
How did they cover can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
How could they cover the aron if they couldn't go into the Kodesh Kodoshim?
No, that's the point. They once they have lowered the parochet and they are carrying, in other words, they're carrying the top half of the parochet that they removed from its hooks, and they're using it to cover the aron. That's the point. So they're technically going to enter the area that was the Kodesh Kodashim. But once they've taken that parochet down, it's no longer the Kodesh Kodashim. It's now moving time. So they are lowering that over the aron without looking at the aron because they're standing on it. They're standing on it and looking at the parochet. So they are not supposed to be seeing. Not supposed to be seeing the aron. Not supposed to be looking at the aron at this point. Okay, but the Kohanim theoretically are allowed to because now it's being disassembled for transport. It's the Leviim who are not supposed to see it. The Kohanim have to see it so that they're covering it properly and preparing it for transportation properly. All right. So again, it has, as I said, multiple covers, and then it has carrying poles. Now the question that we have to ask, and when the Parshanim are going to get to that, I hope we're going to get to that, is this question of V'samu badav means that they shall place the carrying poles. Question is, what does that mean? Because we know that unlike some of the other furniture where the carrying poles are only used for the transportation, the aron is different. If you ever see a picture of the aron, it always has those carrying poles along the side. Every picture of the aron. Why? because we have a pasuk in Truma. We are told, "V'tabot Haron yu abadim lo yasiru mimenu." Once the Aron was built, once the poles were put in the rings that were attached to the side of the Aron, they were never to be removed. So the question that the Parshanim are going to deal with is, what does it mean here? V'samu badav, they should place the carrying poles. We're going to see what that means, and we're going to see a number of different opinions as exactly what that means as when we get into the Parshanim. Hashem. Okay, so that is the Aron. That has to get extra special care because it's the Aron. So it gets not one, not two, but three separate coverings. The one being the parochet, two being either this kisui of tachash skins, and then a wool chelet covering on that. Others say no, that the tachash was the outer cover, because we're going to see later on why is there an outer cover. Tachash skins are leather. Leather is the water repellent. That's to make sure that all of the furniture that we're going to see is going to have a kisui or tachash. It's going to have a outer leather, basically garment bag that it's put in, or a furniture bag that it's put in, if you want to put it that way. That's exactly what this is. And then the poles are going to be placed in. So we're going to see what that means. Now, I'm sorry? What's in the mishkan? Inside, there are four. I said there are four pieces of furniture inside. One is outside in the courtyard. That's the mizbeach. The altar is outside. The four pieces inside are the aron, the menorah, the shulchan, and the mizbeach haktoret. Mizbeach of ktoret. Second, the kruvim are on the aron. Kruvim are part of the aron cover. The al-shulchan, by the way, the kruvim are mentioned, just mentions the aron, and it obviously includes the kaporet and the kruvim. The al-shulchan hapanim. So the second piece of furniture they deal with is the table. Now remember, the table always has 12 loaves on it. Very good, exactly. The al-shulchan hapanim yifrasu beget techelet. Again, they take the first cover that the shulchan gets is a covering of techelet, blue wool. V'natnu alav, and over the techelet, the table itself gets covered with the techelet. On top of that, they put all of the things that are used: the ka'arot, the kapot, the minakiot, the ksoranach stuff, the lechem atamid olav yiyeh. The poles, the posts, and all the breads and all of the holding trays and all of the things that are for the trays seem to go over this blue covering. So they remove the whole bread and that from the table, cover the table with this blue covering, put everything back, and then ufarsu alehem begetolat shani. Instead of getting a blue covering, the bread half of the table gets a tolat shani, a red covering. And then the entire table plus breads gets covered with tachash skin covering, somewhat badav. And then after it's all covered, then they put the carrying poles. Now this one makes sense because the carrying poles aren't usually attached to the shulchan. They're only there for the transportation, according to most of the parshanim, and that's why they have to put the poles.
But the bread could slip off.
The bread could slip off. You're absolutely right. The bread could slip off. That's why they have to secure it. Presumably, that's what all the coverings and the bags are for, to make sure that it fits appropriately. I can't tell you how tightly these fit, but presumably they were tight enough that all of the stuff didn't juggle around and it was rather well secured. Otherwise, you're right. The whole table could have fallen apart, theoretically. Okay. The next thing we have, so we've covered the shulchan. The next thing we do is v'lakhu beget chelet. We take again a beget chelet. V'chisuat menorat ha'ma'or v'yet nerotel. Cover the menorah. V'yet malkochel v'yet machtotel. All of the tools for the menorah. V'yet koklei shamna. All the tools that are used for preparing the oil. Asher shartu lavahem. And what do we do with that? Now, after we cover it, v'natnu otav v'yet kol keleh. We place the entire menorah, el michsei or tachash, into basically a menorah bag. Put in a rather huge menorah bag. Now, interestingly enough, it does not say here v'samuet badav that we will place its carrying poles, because the menorah doesn't have any carrying poles. What do? V'natnu al hamot. The menorah is attached. The bag, the carrying bag, is attached to a huge carrying pole. So as the bag is closed, now whether the pole is on the bottom of the menorah and it's a pair of poles, great question. But it seems al hamot, a single pole, and that's how they had to carry it. I don't know how they kept the menorah off the ground, but the menorah was not higher than a man's height. So the menorah is approximately 3/4 of about 30 inches tall. So if they're carrying it shoulder height, the menorah probably would not hit the ground, unlike some of the other things that might, especially the shulchan. They're carrying the shulchan, the top at shoulder height, the bottom might have some problems moving. So this goes into, as I said, natnu alamot, they put it on a pole, and that's how it is going to be carried. The al mizbach hazav, the fourth piece of furniture, is the mizbach, the internal, the small inside mizbach. Again, yifrasu beged techelet, it gets again the same thing, a chelet covering, the chisur tov michseir tachash, and here v'samu et badav, again, it gets its poles. Here, interestingly enough, the mizbach hazav, unlike the table where everything that's associated with the table goes together with the table, on the table, the menorah, everything goes into the same bag with the menorah. V'lakchu et kol klei hasharei sheyishartu bam bakodesh, all of the things that are used for the ketoret, the mizbach hazav, the mizbach haketoret, all go v'natnu al beged chelet. They get put inside a chelet carrying bag. And then that bag is now covered with a tachash skin bag. And again gets a carrying pole. So remember, we got two carrying poles. We got three things that are being carried, and two bags with a carrying pole, three items of furniture they're carrying with their carrying poles that belong to them. And finally, so that's all the things that are inside. We have one is the aron, three things that are inside the kodesh, and then the last thing is what we're going to get to is, of course, the mizbeach that's outside in the courtyard. Last piece of furniture is the mizbeach. The dishnu at hamizbeach. The first thing you have to do before they travel is they take all the ashes off the mizbeach. The mizbeach has the ashes removed. Ufarsu alav beged argaman. Now it gets an argaman, a purple colored bag covering, and then on top of the purple bag, you put all of the things that are needed, whether it's forks, whether it's shovels, whether it's tongs, tweezers, whatever else they needed to bring all the offerings. All of the tools that are used in the mizbeach, and then they put it on top of the blue cover, the purple covering. They put up all of that kisui or tachash, a covering of tachash skins, bisamu badav, and then again they put its pole. So now we've taken all 5 pieces of furniture, prepared them, and they're all either, as I said, either have carrying poles that are attached to the piece of furniture, or a carrying pole with a bag that the furniture, the item is in. Then, as I said before, when they finish doing all that, and only when they finish putting everything in its luggage, suitcase, whatever you want to call it, right? And only after that can the sons of Kat come in to carry everything, so that they, the sons of Kat, do not prematurely approach the holy items and lead themselves to death. And this is the job of the sons of Kat in Yom Moed. And then we're told that Elazar, the son of Aaron HaKohen, who is actually the superintendent of all of this, he also has his own things that he has to either carry or assign somebody. They are the Shemin Ma'or, Ketoret Samim, Minchat Tamid, and Shemin HaMishcha. And these are what they're here in charge of. And he is the one who is in charge of the family of Kahat. Unlike the other 2 families where we're going to see that Itamar, his younger brother, is the manager or the supervisor of making sure that the Gershon and Merari get all the boards and hangings and curtains and poles, etc., packed away properly and transported properly. Okay, the final thing that Hashem tells us in this week's parsha is, Hashem says again, notice again, it's Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe el Aaron Lamor. Aaron is included in this again. Do not allow the family of Kahat to be cut off from the rest of the Leviim. Because the Bnei Kahat do have to approach to the Aron, to all of these things. Make sure that before they even come in, Aaron of Anav Yavahu, that Aaron and his son should come. The Samu Otam Ish Alavodotovi Al Masao. And the sons of Aaron should make sure that every Levi from Bnei Kahat who walks in is given a specific task. It's not a free-for-all. It's not, okay, you can all come in, take whatever you want. Not the way it works. Everybody gets an assignment, so that they shouldn't seem to be having a free-for-all here in the carrying of the mishkan, and which will lead to their death. That's the parak, and it's very, very clearly set out that there's two halves to this job. One is the Kohanim's job, the other is Levim's job. And the presumption is, and we don't have anywhere in the Torah that it describes it, the presumption is that when they get to the other end, when they get to the stop where they're going to stop, it's the order is reversed. They can't take what they've carried, put it down, and it's the Kohanim who are in charge of reassembling, removing all the casings, and basically reversing this process. Nowhere in the Torah does it say that. That's just the assumption that we have to make from the whole wording of the pasuk and the fact that we are here dealing with those holy things that have to be treated with great kavod and great care. All right. Now, Gemara has a very interesting thought. This is just a side thought, just a very interesting. I only picking this up because we happen to be learning Sota today. Actually, if you're learning Daf Yomi, today is the last Daf of Sota, and tomorrow we start Gittin. But I wanted to quote this one very simple, very short Gemara here, telling us about the carrying of the Aron itself. Tana Rabbanan tells us about how did the Bnei Yisrael cross the Jordan in days of Yoshua. Normally the Aron is in the middle of the camp. On the day they crossed the Jordan River under Yoshua, the Aron led the way, was the first thing to go across. Okay? And this is the important thing, every other day, Leviim nosim et Aron bayom nasa'u HaKohanim. The day they crossed the Jordan River, instead of the Leviim being the ones who were carrying the ark, the Kohanim were the ones carrying the ark. Now, does that mean, and I don't know because I didn't have a chance to go through enough of the parshanim here, does that mean that the Aron didn't have to go through the 16 covers? Good question. Don't know. Can't answer that. But if you ever looked at any artwork of them crossing the Jordan based on Psukim and Yoshua, you'll see the ark there in all its glory without any covers. So Nemar, okay, and plus it brings a proof. But Tanya, and we have a brayta that tells us the following: that Rabbi Yossi Amar b'shalosh mekomot nasua kohanim et Aron. There are actually 3 times in history where the Kohanim were the ones that carried the ark. Time number 1, kishavru et hayarden, when they crossed the Jordan River. Time number 2, kishasebu et Yericho, when they were doing the 7 circuits around Yericho, 1 every day, and then 7 on the Shabbat when they conquered the city. Ukshachziru limekomo. And when Shlomo Melech brought the Aron back and it was put in the Beit HaMikdash. Those are the only 3 times that Kohanim carried it. Every other time, Leviim were in charge of carrying the Aron. All right, let's go here. Now, we go back to the beginning. First thing Hashem tells Moshe and Aaron is to count the Leviim. The first thing that the Torah wants to tell us, if you're giving people jobs of carrying, got to make sure they're physically able to carry what they're being expected to carry. The Haim, and this is mi ben shloshim v'ad ben chamishim shana, from the age of 30 to the age of 50. V'apachot mishloshim lo nitmalei kocho. Despite the fact that we tend to think the youth are all strong, a person doesn't reach their full strength, physical strength, till the age of 30. Kan amru ben shloshim l'koch. This is why in Pirkei Avot we're told that the age of 30 is the age of strength, and then we're also told when you hit 50, that's it. You're finished. It's starting downhill from there. So, but again, this is talking about physical strength, not necessarily mental strength. Remember that. You get to Shishim Zikna and Eitzah and all these other wonderful things that you get to do when you reach a more mature age, you finally have learned a few things, possibly. Kodesh Kodeshim. Okay, the Bnei Kahat are in charge of the holy things. Hamakudash shebechulan, Aron, Shulchan, Midnar, Mizbachot, Aparochet, Uklei Hashoret, so that they are carrying all of the furnishings, these are the most holy things. They're holier than the boards and the curtains, and that's why they're given to Bnei Kahat. And again, what does Rashi say here? Every one of these items that we talked about, the 5 items, and all of the things that are used together with them are all put into an appropriate carrying case. As we just explained, the job of the Levim is not packing. They're not packers. They're the schleppers. They're not the packers. Kohanim are the packers. The Levim have to do the carrying. Okay. Who are the Kohanim? The sons of Aaron. Aaron and his sons and their future descendants. Kahat is one of the families of the tribe of Levi. There are 3 Levitical families. There's Kahat, Gershon, Kahat, and Mari are the 3 sons of Levi, and each of them has a family.
They're not Kohanim.
They're not going. They're Levium. All right. Okay. Let's continue back to here now. All right. Now the question that I asked before was the whole concept of the poles of the ark. Now we said that the Aaron had poles that were there all the time, unlike the Shulchan where the poles are for carrying, the Mizbeach where the poles are for carrying. Both Mizbechot have poles for carrying, as well as the table has poles for carrying. The Aaron had poles that were used for carrying, but they were not removed and replaced only when it was carried. They were there all the time. So why did it say V'samu badav they shall place the poles? Ibn Ezra says very simply. What does it mean? V'samu badav means that the Kohanim had one more job besides packing everything. They were the ones who had to lift the poles up of the ark, al tefot hanoseim, and they were the ones, the Kohanim, not the Leviim, bent down and put the ark on their shoulders. The Kohanim lifted the ark up, put it on the shoulders of the Leviim that were appointed to carry it for that. Why? Now, whether it was the same Levium every time or it was different rotation, good questions. All good questions. The Torah doesn't tell us. My assumption always was that the Levium did a rotation, that it wasn't the same 4 Levium carrying the ark every time it moved. When each time it moved, there was a different group of Levium who were carrying it. Yes. The Kohanim are in charge of covering everything up, putting it in its packing case, and then Levium would come in and pick everything up and move it. However, Ibn Ezra wants to say that the pasuk V'samu badav, specifically with the Aron, not with everything else, with the Aron is there to tell us that the Kohanim who packed the Aron were the ones who had to lift it up and put it on the shoulders of the Levium who were carrying it. Okay, next, let's go. All right. Now, the Ramban wants to give us a little bit of insight into how this whole thing was packed, the Aron specifically. Bavur malat ha'aron lo haya nira lav kisuyar tachash. Ramban's opinion is that we go according to the order of the verse. The verse said, first we put the parochet, then we put the blue cover, then we put the tachash cover, and then we put the blue cover. And the reason that we have that extra blue cover over the tachash leather cover is because that we did not want to, it wouldn't be proper and appropriate for the Aron, because of its sanctity, to be seen in a plain leather bag. Just isn't appropriate for the Aron to be being packed in a plain leather bag. They first covered it with the parochet. And again, Ramban makes seems to say that the purpose of each of these tachash covers clearly is to protect everything from the rain. I don't know, they're traveling through the desert. Don't ask me how much rain they had and who protected it from the rain when it was in the mishkan. All great questions. Oh, well, I should say there were covers. So there were covers. So it was protected. But the mizbeach wasn't. Mizbeach was out in the courtyard. There was no cover for the mizbeach. But here, the Aron clearly should be covered and protected from the rain. And Ramban's opinion is that we go exactly as the verse says, that the tchelet cover was not inside the tachash bag. It was a cover for the tachash bag to beautify it because it was the Aron. We know that tchelet is the color of the shamayim, is the color of the sky, the color of the shamayim, and for the beauty, for the honor of the ark, that was the only piece of furniture that had an outer covering over the tachash skins. Raman continues. The rest of the kelim, hashulchan, menorah, mizbachot, hayinir aleim, milmala, michzior tachash. All the other things, when they were moving, all you saw was the leather covering, the tachash leather covering. That was it. There was no special thing placed over it because it was the Aron. So I guess everybody knew which was the Aron because the Aron had the blue cover. The age of the Kohanim, no. The Kohanim do not have to be the age of 30 and 50 because they're not schlepping. They're just putting bags. Well, again, that's one opinion. There's another whole opinion in terms of carrying the ark. There's a midrash that says Aron no seyet no sam. That the Aron, it looked like people were carrying it, but the Aron was really carrying them rather than them carrying the Aron. So the Kohanim, there is no age limit. Kohanim have other limitations on when they're allowed to perform all the avodah, but Kohanim, there's no age limit. Once they reach the age of bar mitzvah, I shouldn't say there's no age limit, but there's no upper age limit. Unlike Levium, at 50, they retire from active duty and they become either shomrim or singers or musicians. The carriers had to be between 30 and 50. That's the first opinion. Raman's first opinion is that the chelet cover was outside the Aron. V'yesh omrim, that really the chelet cover was over the parochet. V'natnu alav, and they placed upon it both the Aron and the parochet. Kisur tachash, all of that. The tam v'samu badav, and again, this Raman says that the v'samu badav. One opinion is al tefora kohanim, which we just said. Well, it's interesting. Kohanim, it says they put the poles were placed on the shoulders of the kohanim. Why did they place them on the shoulders of the kohanim? Kohanim weren't the ones carrying it. He's paraphrasing it as it means that the kohanim picked it up on their shoulders, and then presumably the Levium came over and replaced them. Unless we want to be of the opinion that he's quoting somebody whose opinion was that the Kohanim were the ones who always carried it, which seems to not be the general opinion, and seems not to be in accord with the pshat of the pasuk. But Ramban gives a different explanation. What does it mean? V'samu badav, they placed the poles for the ark. The Hanachon ki v'samu sheyitaknu otam liyot yotzim laseit oto bahem, that they had to place the poles in the right position along the ark so that they could be carried properly from both sides. Because the rings that held the poles were larger than the size of the pole. The poles could slide. They had moving room within the rings. In other words, there are two poles that are held on the sides of the Aron by 4 rings, one on each side of each of the poles. And yet they weren't tight against the end of the poles. In other words, it wasn't a snug fit that the length of the poles was exactly the length between the distance between the 2 rings. There was extra length on each pole. It had to be, because otherwise, how would you get it out to put the pole on your shoulder to carry it? So what he says is that when the Aron was stationary, the poles were pulled all the way forward, as we see, as it says, the poles were pulled to the forwardmost position when the Aron was placed down and the parochet was put up. The reason for that was this way the indentation of the poles could be seen in the parochet. And as we find that it describes that in Malachim, it tells us that the poles could be seen. The indentation of the poles were there that you knew the Aron was still in its place, was the fact that the poles were visible, or the indentation from the poles was visible, but that was only when they were pulled fully forward. When they were carried, what Ramban wants to say is that the samu means they now had to push them back to the middle position so that both the front and the back person carrying them had a pole to put on their shoulders. That's Ramban's opinion. We're going to skip the rest of this for a minute and we'll get back to some of this perhaps, but I want to quote the next opinion, which is Chizkuni. All right, Chizkuni, firstly, let's go to the poles, and then we'll come back to the rest of Chizkuni. Sama Badav. Umashinemar. Pitzkuni says, Umashinemar lo yasur. Wait a minute. How can you say we are placing the poles on the Aron if we have a pasuk in the building of the Aron that says the poles can never be removed? What does it mean they put them? He says very interestingly, Arba badim hayu. There were 4 poles to the ark. Shnayim kavuim bo. 2 are the ones that we talked about in Trumah that are always there. They're not allowed to be removed. The other 2 are what it's talking about here. Place the poles that they actually use for carrying. The 2 poles that stayed there all along were never used for carrying. There were 2 other poles that were attached to the Aron that were used for carrying. By the way, that's not the generally accepted opinion, but Chizkuni brings that as an opinion. Davar Acher. He himself says, I'm not so sure there were 4 poles. Wait a minute. Lo hayu shamrak shnei badim. There were really 2 badim. Shnei charitzim hayu badim. V'notnim hatabaot b'charitzim shelo yipol ha'aron al ha'olech harishon b'ridato al ha'olech acharon ba'aloto. There were 2 indentations along the poles. Indentations along the poles that locked into the rings so that when they were traveling, the poles had no movement. They were locked into place. Why? Because if they weren't, the whole ark would slide forward when the guy in front was going downhill, or the guy in back was going down. When he was going uphill, they'd slide on the back guy. When they were going downhill, they'd slide on the front guy. So in order to make sure that it didn't slide, the poles had to be fastened to the rings, which they weren't normally when it was done. Davar Acher. And then he quotes the 3rd opinion, is Avisamu Badav. What does it mean? They placed the poles al ktefot hanosim, on the shoulders of the carriers. The Kohanim were in charge of putting the poles on the carriers. One other opinion here. Okay, no, that was it. That was the only part. Okay. All right. Finally, let me get back to where we are here. Now, Chizkuni had another couple of other interesting points that I wanted to just discuss very briefly. One, Chizkuni. Okay. The reason that Aaron is included, Chizkuni says, the reason that Aaron is included in the command, he says, not only the ark was lifted up by the Kohanim to put on the Levium's shoulders, but everything was lifted up to put, all of the loads were lifted up by the Kohanim to put on the Levium's shoulders. That's why Aaron is mentioned, because he has a significant role in this. I would say, well, his significant role is making sure everything gets packed right, but Chizkuni adds another dimension to the role of Aaron and the Kohanim. And why, again, Chizkuni wants to know why Kahat is before Gershon, even though Gershon is the firstborn of Levi. Why doesn't his jobs get listed first? Because he is the one who is in charge with carrying the Aron goes first. That's pretty straightforward. And finally, I wanted to quote the Sforno, who has a very interesting comment on the whole procedure that the Levium and Kohanim had to follow when they went through this. Moshe and Aaron are told, Al tachridu et shevet mishpachot because don't allow the Levium to be cut off because they are not approaching this with the appropriate dignity is not the right word, the appropriate solemnity of their job. Al tanichu et hamasaot bi'ofan sheyiske behem kol hakodem. You're not allowed to allow the carriers to say, whoever comes first gets the job. Because what will happen is they'll be pushing and shoving because everyone wants to get there first. And through that, they will profane the holy things and they will be cut off. So therefore, the job of the Kohanim after they've packed everything, it is the job of the Kohanim to pick a Levi and to appoint him to his task. Repeats it again, that you can't have it, whoever comes first gets the job. Another reason why, yes, if we allow everybody to rush and do whoever comes first, it will cause problems. But in addition, it is better to be somebody who is given a job and fulfill it than just say, okay, I'm going to take this job, even though I'm not commanded to do it. It's better to be somebody who's commanded to do something and do it. Finally, they shouldn't come to look as though they are being disrespectful to the Kodesh. If the Kohanim do their jobs properly, they will not be coming early. See, if you tell me whoever comes first gets the job, they'll be lining up and they'll be coming in too early. They'll want to come earlier, and what will they be doing? They'll be seeing the vessels before the Kohanim have properly covered them. We don't want them to be obligated because they've looked at the holy vessels when they're not supposed to be looking. So they have to wait. The Bnei Kohat have to wait till everything is packed up by the Kohanim. Then they come in, and they still don't go. They still have to wait until each one is given their appointed task. This is all to ensure the proper respect for the whole procedure. And I think it teaches a couple of very important lessons. Firstly, when everything is a free-for-all, it's a free-for-all, and that's not respectful to whatever it is. This applies to anything, whether it's something as simple as, there's a kiddush going on. Oh, let's all run to be the first one online to get food. It's not respectful. It's not appropriate to the person who's making the kiddush. It's not an appropriate thing. There are many times in life where, we're busy rushing, I want to be first, and we're busy pushing. Whether there's a bus, and there are only 12 seats on it, and there are 20 people online waiting for that bus, and the next bus is not for another 45 minutes. You don't have to push your way. Yes, you're right. There will be people who will do it, but it's not appropriate. And there are as I said, many other situations in life where this lesson very much applies, that we have to do things in an appropriate, respectful manner. And that's really, I think, the lesson the Torah is trying to teach us. Yes, we're talking about the Aron, but the same thing applies whether it's a Beit Knesset, whether it's a Beit Midrash, whether it's anything. Even, for example, at a wedding, you're rushing to do a mitzvah of welcoming the Chatan and Kala, or of giving kavod or honor, or misamech Chatan and Kala, which is a very important mitzvah. You still don't have to be sitting and pushing and elbowing people out of the way. I think that's really one of the key lessons, takeaways from this whole parsha. I think the second key takeaway is that everybody has to know their role, has to know their job, and that's very, very important, as we saw, of course, with the case of Nadav and Avihu, that everybody has to know their place, know their role. If we're going to come closer to Hashem, we've got to do it by Hashem's rules, not by our rules. And I hope we all take those lessons to heart, and through that we can help create a greater love for Torah, a greater love for HaKadosh Baruch Hu and for mitzvot, and a greater love for Am Yisrael, so that we will be able to spread that all to the world, and be able to see what all these things look like in real life, or at least ask the people who had to do them in real life. Thank you all. Open up for questions, comments, and feedback at this point. Any questions or comments at this point? If not, I will wish everyone a good evening and say thank you for joining. Best John, we'll see you next week. Have a great Shabbos. Laila Tov, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
Wording.